Good afternoon, happy spring, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Marielle Villeray. I'm the Program Development Director for the Office of Academic Initiatives and Strategic Innovation here at the Graduate Center. And we are so pleased to be partnering with Copland House on this series of virtual programs and pairing musicians from the ensemble there with students in the doctoral program at the Graduate Center. And today we have a very special presentation with a renowned composer, and I will hand it off to Michael Boriskin to tell us more about that. And before I do, just a reminder that we will be taking questions throughout the program for the Q&A following the music. So please submit those using the Q&A tool on the bottom panel of your Zoom window, and those will be brought into the conversation. Enjoy.
I'm Michael Boriskin, the Artistic and Executive Director of Copland House, greeting you from Aaron Copland's work desk in Aaron Copland's studio. I'm happy to welcome you for this next program in our Underscored series, spotlighting past and present American composers and their work. Today, we're privileged to be featuring one of the most formidable and renowned composers in the U.S., John Harbison. John has won the Pulitzer Prize, the MacArthur Foundation Fellowship, that's the so-called Genius Award, the Harvard Arts Medal, Heinz Award, and a long, long list of other prestigious honors. And the piece that Music from Copland House is going to present in a few minutes is John's distinctive and really inventive quartet for piano and three strings called November 19th, 1828. That's not the date the piece was written. That's the title of the work. John actually composed it in the late 1980s. No, the piece is named after the actual date the great Viennese composer Franz Schubert died. And John has constructed this whole musical scenario of Schubert's passing into the afterlife. And what a remarkable imagined journey this is. Those of you who have joined us before for these programs, which we co-present with the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, will know to stay with us after our performance for a live Q&A. And you'll certainly not want to pass up the chance to connect with John by sending in your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. But first, John and I are going to chat briefly about this magical, mystical, and quite wondrous piece of music. John, welcome. What an honor it is to be able to chat with you, and a special delight to speak with you about this really inventive and unusual work of yours that we're featuring today. Let's start right away by speaking about what seems like a really striking concept of the piece and the idea behind it. So take it away. Tell us about a piece that you have titled November 19th, 1828.
Yeah, it was sort of an unusual, spooky experience, really. I found myself imagining Schubert crossing over to the next world. He had, before that date, he had been sort of hallucinatory for a while. And I really wanted to sort of translate a kind of Schubertian hallucination into sort of, I guess, contemporary terms, but with a sort of an assist from that moment in his life where we know in his very last phase, he was not only writing a lot of music at a kind of frantic pace, and had actually finished the Winterreise, which really kind of tells the world he knows where he is. He knows what the point of his journey had reached. But also that he had been grappling right at the end of his life with very simple issues of counterpoint. He deliberately took himself back to study with Anton Zechter, who was not such an old pedagogue. He was much older by the time he did the same thing with Bruckner quite a few years later, taking a mature composer who comes to him and says, I need to know how to make the second entrance of a fugue subject, that kind of thing.
And let's get some context here, because let's remember that Schubert died when he was only 31. And you've been talking about, late in his life, and you've been talking about hallucinating. So that is a whole other fascination with all Schubert going through this when he was not even in middle age.
Indeed, and he'd gotten a kind of death sentence right around the time he's writing the Schöner Miller. There's this clear shadow comes right across his whole thinking, his work. So he'd been a number of years in this, I would have to say, walking with this knowledge that his time was short. And we do feel that, I think. There is something about the incredible deep searching quality of many of these pieces that we're aware that he's dealing with it. So I guess what I was interested in was in a kind of an odd sort of channeling of what was it like for him to be thinking about these rather academic subjects at the same time that he is thinking about crossing over, passing on. And the academic subjects are themselves interesting. That is, that he was a composer of remarkable instinctive craft who was having trouble in his masses with very fundamental issues of, second entrance of his counter subject and so forth, handling the harmonic issues. So I wanted to include, from the very beginning, I thought I would include a fugue based on a subject which this very teacher had published when Schubert died in honor of the student that he clearly thought was a very impressive student. You gotta believe it. And Zechter himself had printed his own solution to his subject based on Schubert's name. So I thought this would be at the very least one element of the piece that could sort of focus the odd series of events which preceded this very fateful day.
For sure. And that brings us to what seems like a fairly well worked out scenario that you have of this piece reflected in just the structure and the array of the sections of the piece. I mean, there's an introduction where we hear the blare of trumpets. There's a suite, a kind of suite within the piece, a mini suite, which I guess is a theme of variations. There's a rondo, and there's this fugue that you were talking about. In this suite, there's something that is very strange that happens that you do in it, and talk a little bit about it, because it seems like we have a very fragmentary theme, but then we hear it upside down, and it's like everything that happens in this little suite, in this theme and variations, reflects itself almost immediately after we hear it. What's that about?
I was thinking that inversion in this piece was sort of substituting for after the transition, that upside down was possibly the way the universe will appear. So that whole suite, I think there's a set of maybe 4 sort of Schubert types.
Right.
Things that he did often in a certain way, kind of allusions to that quickly, as if they're kind of flashing past him as he prepares to depart. And the inversion to me was really now the world is upside down.
I think you call it in your written introduction to the piece a hall of mirrors.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And of course, I wanted to, I don't usually like to quote. I think it's always a dangerous place for us composers to go. But I wanted to use a fragment, partly just to dramatize this idea that here's something that was promising that didn't ever get finished by this composer. Schubert leaves behind less unfinished material than many composers. I mean, compared to Mozart, who left tremendous numbers of very workable torsos. There aren't so many of Schubert, but this is a little, I think, very interesting beginning to a piano piece that he doesn't finish up. And it seems to be tending already in the fragment that we have to sort of obsession, to getting locked in, as Schubert often does, in kind of stasis.
And that's the rondo.
The rondo, yeah.
And that's the only piece, you correct me if I'm wrong, that's the only piece of music that Schubert wrote, the only actual Schubert that's in this piece, correct?
That's right. The beginning, yes, is actual Schubert. And
the beginning of the rondo.
Mm-hmm, right. And I take it through to the point that it does seem to get locked into one. One of these beautiful girl came on the screen. After the transition, that upside down was possibly the way the universe will appear. So that whole suite, I think there's a set of maybe 4 sort of Schubert types.
Right.
Things that he did often in a certain way, kind of allusions to that quickly, as if they're kind of flashing past him as he prepares to depart. And the inversion to me was really, now the world is upside down.
I think you call it in your written introduction to the piece a hall of mirrors.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And of course, I wanted to, I don't usually like to quote. I think it's always a dangerous place for us composers to go. But I wanted to use a fragment, partly just to dramatize this idea that here's something that was promising that didn't ever get finished by this composer. Schubert leaves behind less unfinished material than many composers. I mean, compared to Mozart, who left tremendous numbers of very workable torsos. There aren't so many of Schubert, but this is a little, I think, very interesting beginning to a piano piece that he doesn't finish up. And it seems to be tending already in the fragment that we have to sort of obsession, to getting locked in, as Schubert often does, in kind of stasis.
And that's the rondo.
The rondo, yeah.
And that's the only piece, you correct me if I'm wrong, that's the only piece of music that Schubert wrote, the only actual Schubert that's in this piece, correct?
That's right. The beginning, yes, is actual Schubert. And
the beginning of the rondo.
Mm-hmm, right. And I take it through to the point that it does seem to get locked into one of these trance moments. And then I just extend a couple of those. Because, of course, Schubert, I think, is the inventor in a certain way in his era of that sort of moment of stasis, that sort of hovering quality, which is so unusual in his music so often. So I wanted to take advantage of these places where we could arrest the motion of this piece in certain ways.
Fascinating, fascinating. Well, let us hear now this really intriguing piece. Music from Copland House has performed this wonderful piece quite a number of times. We are endlessly fascinated by it. It's a wonderful experience to perform it. We hope it will be a wonderful experience for all of you in hearing the piece. It is performed by Curtis Macumber, the violinist, violist Catherine Lockwood, cellist Alexis Pia Gerlach, and me as pianist. Please don't leave us because, as usual in our Underscored series, join us. John will be back after the performance to take all of your questions. Please use the nifty Q&A feature at the bottom center of your screen. We'll be back. I don't think I want to say we'll see you on the other side, given this conversation, but enjoy the performance and we will see you later. Thanks for joining us. And thank you, John, for being here.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, Michael.
Well, we are here for the live Q&A. Welcome back to this side, to all of you for joining us. This is the kind of trip to the next world that's a good one to take, because if it allows us to come back. And apologies, first of all, for the brief technical glitch. I want to just remind everyone, while you are gathering your questions and typing them in, to please do so with the Q&A button at the bottom center of your screen, not the chat button, but the Q&A function. I want to mention a couple of other things very briefly. This entire program has been recorded, including this Q&A, and it will be posted on the Graduate Center website, I guess on the Graduate Center YouTube page. We will be sending you more information about it, so you can watch the program again and hear this magnificent piece once more, and tell all your friends about it as well. The Graduate Center is also going to be sending all of you a brief survey. We'd love to collect your thoughts about the program. It will help inform our path forward. And I also just want to take a brief moment to mention that our next program in this Underscored series is, as always, on the fourth Monday of the month. Next up on April 26th, we're actually, speaking of time traveling, we're going to be traveling back to a work that was written over 100 years ago, one of the early landmarks in the American chamber music repertory, and it was written by a remarkable composer who was really the first American woman to become widely prominent and widely acknowledged as a master composer. I guess one can't call a woman a master composer. And that was Amy Beach. From New England, and we're going to be playing her great, luxuriant, grand quintet for piano and strings, which was written in 1908. So please join us April 26th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. But for now, I see that we already have questions coming in, and I'm going to call them up. So we have a question from actually a wonderful composer named Hayes, second name withheld for the moment. And he said, John, that he's found the idea behind this piece fascinating, but never had a chance to hear it today. Thanks so much for this. We've got a whole bunch of questions here. We'll skip over the compliments for the performance. All of them are writing about what a wonderful piece this is. And another composer, boy, we've got a whole bunch of composers here. Paul from the West Coast talks about this being a delicious opening for the strings. And he also talks about liking the fugue and how magical it was. Can we talk just for a quick second as the questions are coming in about the opening, which starts with the strings, and then we have the piano, but the strings almost sound like they're emulating trumpets somehow. What is that about?
Well, yeah, I wanted something formal, and of course they play triads. They're already playing with the inversion idea, which goes on through the whole piece. But I wanted them to sound increasingly stern and abstract, and eventually kind of a little bit spectral. So they change their manner of playing during the piece. And then the pianist keeps coming back in its own world, dealing with these little fragments which somehow suggest a certain kind of Schubertian sort of states of rest. I think of them as sort of pauses in momentum. In fact, I think Schubert kind of is the first discoverer of doing nothing among the great composers.
Did I read somewhere that the strings are kind of emulating the trumpets of death?
Yeah, I hope they were sort of scary. Though, of course, I work a lot in the Bach and Tauta world, where in the pietist region, where death is not scary anymore. I mean, all the Bach motets are very cheerful pieces because the next world will be so much better. I don't think Schubert thought of it that way.
Right, and the piano kind of, is it fair to say that the piano sort of personifies Schubert?
Yeah, to some degree. It's of course, in the suite, everyone I think is participating in the sort of investigation of Schubert types. Though I guess the piano plays things that we might sort of think more of Schubert as a pianist. Schubert was an interesting pianist himself, a kind of a clearly very expressive, but sometimes to my consolation, when I see manuscripts of his own songs for him to play, he left out the hard parts.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, that's consoling somehow.
Yes, it is for us pianists. Since you mentioned the piano and the other instruments, can we talk for a quick second about the configuration, which seems interesting here, that rather than being treated as four individual instruments that occasionally come together and interact in various ways, it really seems like we're dealing with two almost discrete units, instrumental units. We have the piano, which is often on its own or clearly taking the lead, while the three strings are almost always in a kind of cohesive unit. It's like there's a balance between the two. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I did continue through the piece thinking of Schubert represented by the piano part. And of course, Schubert he had a very unusual life. Schubert and his friends, that we don't know of any other composer for whom the whole biography is sort of summed up by the idea of Schubert and friends. And he lived with friends. He lived without a permanent address much of the time, moving from friend to friend. It's a very distinctive, we call it bohemian or hippie, I guess, in recent terms. And the idea, I think, on this piece was of separating him out as this sort of lonely spirit, but also being supported by this group that, he would stop in and stay there for a while, once in a while. It's remarkable to me that all through his life, he seems never to really have had a stable street address.
That's fascinating. He was quite itinerant, but within
a small circle of and of course, part of what reason we have these pieces, I think, was the incredibly staunch support of the friends. Because in certain ways, given what he was writing, he didn't have the kind of recognition you might expect, but the friends got it, and they were totally on board with him.
Is that one of the things I wondered about is the concept of this piece is really so distinctive and imaginative, but was there one thing or some group of things that sort of drew you to create a piece like this around Schubert? I mean, one thinks of Mozart, in his short and very colorful life, and the end of his life, which was rather dramatic. And I mean, somebody like Robert Schumann, who had a tragic ending, a more drawn out ending with, you know, just sort of going off the deep end and ending his life in an asylum. What was it about Schubert that sort of made this seem like he was the person for this concept?
Well, it was the conjunction, of course, of thinking about him. I knew about that last few days thing of the hallucination. I'm very interested in sort of imagining things through a dream some of the time, or a kind of the unreal state. I knew that was connected to Schubert. I also found, just, I don't know in what journal or I was reading, that very much of that moment, when within a year of my writing this piece, the manuscript had suddenly come to light of his lessons with Sechter. And since, I'm always trying to convince people I teach that learning stuff is important, and the idea of Schubert coming at a very mature level of his career to a teacher to learn something very specific, I thought I might be able to find a way to also apply through the piece some sort of musical sort of work-a-day musical relationship issues that sort of permeate the piece. The way, as I imagine Schubert, end of his life, deciding I've got to learn this thing. I've still got this set of very fundamental things I'm trying to nail down. And of course, he was still a young man, so I'm sure in some hopeful way he was looking ahead. But I wanted to attach it to that business of musical technique. And I guess the Paul Henry Lang article just sort of sparked that, particularly because it was strange that for hundreds of years, the text of that of those lessons hadn't come to light. And of course, what the lesson showed was a really good student. I mean, Schubert picking it up as we might expect. This is what I need to know. And applying it, obviously, particularly to music like his choral music over his last years.
Right. Well, there's a question actually that we've got here from Beatrice. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it's about the fugue, and specifically the fugue theme. Was it really from Schubert's time? She writes. It sounds original. And she also asked why, it's a two-part question, why you chose to end with the fugue. So part A, is the fugue theme really from Schubert's time?
The theme is by the teacher, by Anton Sechter, that Schubert went to learn these counterpoint issues. And it's exactly as he wrote it. He published it himself with his own solution, with his own working
completion.
out. Yeah, and I saw that. I mean, I looked at that and decided to do two other different versions. I very much wanted one of the versions not to be in the Schubert manner. The one that you played. By the way, thanks so much for you guys' wonderful performance. But I think the other one was, in a way the way I felt less sure, because I thought I ought to try to do a Schubertian harmonization of Sechter's tune. And that's the one the strings played in this performance. And that I was not completely clear at every moment that I had the right time frame there, but I was certainly, that was the goal of that, and the question is good, because it was, of course, Sechter was a composer of, in a way, a somewhat earlier era than Schubert, but certainly a semi-contemporary, and he was a very known pedagogue in Vienna, somebody extremely distinguished, and many years later, Bruckner goes to him in a similar state of questions. gets very specific kinds of instruction for him at a point where he's already written quite a lot of music.
For sure. And the completion that you said was published was Zechter's completion.
There's a published, yes, Zechter publishes his own. And that has been extant for a long time. What we haven't had, and it just turned up in right around the time I wrote this piece, was Schubert's lessons with Zechter, which is very surprising. They remain somewhere buried somewhere, and where we see exactly what was the point of the lesson, I guess.
Beatrice asked part 2 of this question as to how you thought to end the piece with the fugue. And the piece, end the piece is sort of in quotes because the piece doesn't really end. It kind of evaporates, doesn't it? We're sort of left in this trance.
Yeah, it goes more back into the issues of the beginning, but I think I wanted to end it because I wanted to conclude where the idea for the piece started in a way, which is the lessons, the idea of Schubert back to school. And we associate fugue with back to school to some degree. Though, of course, I will always feel, though, at the same time, fugue is one of the most liberating and wide open sort of areas for music to function. And in the Bachian sense, it means kind of flight. It means make something distinctive up, But it is associated with certain kinds of marks.
It's interesting that you talk about it being the most open, because I, as a decidedly not a composer, have always thought of the fugue as the most rigorous of forms. Kind of like sort of multi-dimensional musical chess or something.
I think the goal points are not so rigorous, and what's really required in fugue is invention and flight, fuga, And I think the best fugue writer is Beethoven and Mozart and Bach, I guess, would be right on top.
For sure.
Great fugue writers have that sense of making the moments where they need fantasy, where they really have to completely invent. That's very advanced part of the form. I think that's where they thrive. Making a so-called correct fugue with all the dots and over the eyes, it seems to be pretty easy. We've, every year, the artificial intelligence guys at MIT send me the latest fugue by their computer. And the computer, I always write back in a kind of not very hospitable way. I say, congratulations, this year it's a Kernberger fugue, It's getting better, but what isn't there, of course, the computer's done very well in chess, probably beaten the world champion. But the reason it's not doing that as well with the fugue is the need for invention and unusual solutions at so many points. And that's where Bach and Kernberger, who was, I'm sure, a very good student, is not really going to be able to do it. And the computer, I'm sure, will stay at it. We stay tuned.
Well, for sure.
Yeah,
gosh,
it's an interesting quest. Yeah,
it sure is. And the thought of AI fugues, that's a subject for a whole other program. And I don't think it's quite right to say the mind boggles from the thought of
it's a question
of AI fugues.
Yeah, what is boggling there? I don't know.
Yes, exactly. Actually, we had a comment from our violist, Catherine Lockwood, who as the violist in the Lark Quartet, and I gather that you wrote a wonderful string quartet for the Lark. Catherine is always raving about it, and she just wrote in to say that she She loves this piece, and especially the fourth movement, which reminds her of the last movement of the string quartet that you wrote for the Lark. Last question. We could stay on this for quite a while, but very quickly, Beatrice, again, had asked about a biography of Schubert that you might recommend.
Well, it depends if you want to go very big or very large or very small. There is a Schubert scholar, Otto Erich Deutsch, whose biographical work is that if you really want to know as much as possible, you will go there. The Master Musician series has a very short biography, which is I love because it's very poignant and it focuses very much on the friends. And that's always the thing I've been most curious about. That is the extreme unorthodoxy of Schubert's life. It seems so much more like the American 60s, or I guess Biedermeier, Vienna had some of those qualities of everybody kind of figuring it out on their own and avoiding getting pinned down by certain kinds of jobs. And, Schubert was constantly going shy of taking a steady employment, trying to keep his mornings open. And one of the miracles about Schubert, I'm not this way at all, but Schubert was convivial. He spent a huge amount of his time socializing, going out drinking, probably getting pretty hammered. Coming home in the morning, amazingly lucid and writing 3 or 4 or 5, 6 songs. It's a very bohemian, you would say risky existence, but nevertheless amazingly touching and amazingly contemporary somehow in feeling when you read about him.
Yes.
So I'd say almost start anywhere with Schubert, but try to get something that gives you a picture of the life. It's so distinctive, so unusual.
For sure. Well, thank you so much. I'm just going to quickly close with a comment from a colleague of all of ours, Neva, who I think is in upstate New York. She's a big fan of yours, a great artist and presenter, and she's programmed a number of your pieces. And she concludes her comment with, "Thanks for being such a great composer, John," to which I would only add ditto. It's been a delight. Music from Copland House has also been playing songs America loves to sing quite a lot. We hope to spotlight that piece or underscore it on this series, and we hope we'll have you back. In the meantime, next concert, April 26th, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, Amy Beach, the great piano quintet from 1908. John, thank you so much. Viewers, thank you all for joining us, and please come back next time. Thank you.
Thank you all.